right. Good morning. Happy holidays, everyone, to you. Welcome to CRPN Central, the podcast dedicated to exploring some of the challenges that we as an industry have so that we can bring in some of the best people of the best, talk about our experiences, and make a better future. So, coming on to stage today is Fehr, Nicole Holguin. How are you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
Happy
Great.
festive day to you. Um, let's see here. So, we are here to talk about a very exciting topic, something that everyone looks forward to talking about: record retention, archival, things like that. We had a podcast about it. You both had an amazing description about what we go through in record retention. And you had some really cool ideas about what we can do to make it better. Before we dig into that, let's do introductions. So, Nicole, would you be willing to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Holguin. I am the co-owner of Cornerstone Clinical Research Services. And I have been in research for almost 14 years now at the site level and above. But as a company, we focus on small sites and helping operations. Happy to be here.
Mm-hmm. And so Cornerstone, they're doing a really good job.
Thank you.
Fehr, One Oak. Would you be willing to introduce yourself?
Sure. So Fehr, I'm the co-owner of One of a Kind Clinical Research Center. I've been in the business for about 15 years, and we have a main site in Arizona and another one in California, and we're just growing.
Wow. So, Anaheim, California, where do you want to go on growth? Like, are you going to go over the West Coast? Where do you want to go? Like, as far as growth?
Well, right now we're in Napa, California, so Northern
Mhm.
California. And honestly, we will go wherever the provider wants us to go. So we are interviewed every now and then by different providers, and they're interested in research, and we're one of their many options to choose from. There's lots of companies out there that do what we do. What we just do a little bit different is that we keep that independent feel, right? We're not an SMO. We're not a major corporation trying to implant ourselves somewhere. We're small. We're just, individuals, mom and pop type shop. Alexandria and I are the ones that will go and work that new office with that new provider as we bring on staff and help that slow growth process for them, as comfortable as the PI is. We have some PIs that only want to do no more than 2 studies a year. That's fine, right? We're not in it for the profit. So we're in it for keeping those small businesses up and running and for the patients in the community.
I love it. And I agree with that completely. Nicole, do you run into that as well, the Cornerstone, right? Maybe just you kind of help the doctors as they need it for research?
Definitely. And actually, onboarding and training new PIs is one of my passion projects. So, Anna, we should definitely talk more after this.
So, and I mean, I have had the opportunity to talk with both of you very extensively on so many different topics. And admittedly, I was afraid of finding people who'd want to talk about archiving because most people are like, and hey, I'd really like to do a podcast on archiving. And you see that face that, like, oh gosh, really? That how dry can that be? But then all of a sudden, boy, we just, this was one of my favorite ones from the skit. Did you guys like the skit at the beginning?
Yes, with the robot voice.
I actually had one of my sites reach out and goes, I never thought about document storage like that until that skit. That skit really made me, it's like, wow, that makes a lot of sense though. So it's neat to see even like the skit, it had people thinking, they're like, oh, okay, this is weird. So that's how this works. That's how it happens. So we talked about record retention, we talked about archiving and doc storage, and we have a lot to talk about, believe it or not. So my first question is, and we'll just go from Nicole over. So Nicole, when you heard the podcast, how did you feel about your interview compared to Anna's?
Well, actually, I was surprised how similar our answers were and how aligned we were on a lot of things. So that was kind of my initial reaction.
What was similar?
Going over the regulations, not letting document storage be a second thought, right? Looking in your contracts, being aware of what you're committed to, and how you're going to operationalize what you're, committed to contractually. And yeah, we just had a lot of the same answers along those lines. And with the same energy of electronic. Sure.
So
Yeah.
these are both. So you're both team electronic. You're like electronic all the way.
I'm having such a hard time being 100% committed because there's still things that get messed up, and I'm like, well, if it was paper, it'd be easier. So
yeah,
I am there. I am like 90% there, but we still have our twinklings of little paper things. I wish I could say I was 100%, but I guess 90 would be better.
Well, and it's also, we're talking about electronic, and I guess you could talk about eSource, and that's fine. But there are sponsors they get really picky about like TalkDown tech. Like you have to use our tech, or no tech. And then a lot of sites are like, well, fine, the no tech, because I don't want to sit here with a patient in front of me waiting for your tech not to work. So we're just gonna go back to paper, go back to the old school. And so there might be a time and place still, unfortunately, until we can get sites to have validated systems where you might still have to do paper every once in a while. So
yeah, I have a lot of PTSD, I think, working with a client right now that is 100% paper, and we're changing that, but just the amount of paper. I mean, even, I was carrying like 4 or 5 of those 4-inch binders across the hall, and I tripped. No joke, I tripped, and 3 binders went flying. The middle rings opened up. All the source went everywhere. The entire time, I just electronic the whole time. I'm putting together. I mean, it took at least an hour to put those charts back together. I mean, so I have PTSD. So Anna, I'm like, I get it, but I am just like right now in my life.
Oh, that's so stressful.
Oh my gosh. That sounds like a Hallmark movie.
Right? And then she meets the man of her dreams with a red truck and a Christmas tree.
Which says eSource on the side of the car, My
Nicole,
eSource hero.
Something so similar happened to me in one of the very first sites I worked in, and back in early 2000s. And then we implemented an SOP that all charts, all binders had to be wheeled on a wheelie cart. Like it was in the SOP that our PI put on there. Was like, this is never going to happen again, because it just sprung open and pages went everywhere, and it's like which was for which, and oh my gosh, I really
get on board. I could get on board with that SOP.
Get an SOP on. It's a cart SOP. It's not a chart. It's a cart SOP.
How to transport source binders inside your facility.
Now that's a specific SOP.
A cart with wheels.
And that cart with wheels, it must be calibrated or no. We won't do that. But so Anna, when you heard the interviews, did you resonate with anything that you heard with Nicole?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like she said earlier, I do believe that we had a lot of similar takes. And what I thought was interesting is that the both of you agreed that document storage and retention starts from the start of the study, to where we have all these interesting built-in fees to our budget that we kind of make it so that we don't claim that financial burden until closeout. But it wasn't always completely enforced. It was just a concept like, oh, well, we could do this, we could do that, whatever. But now after listening to the podcast, I do want to make sure that we are forcing that either it's a yearly continuous document storage fee, or that we up those end of study costs there.
Yeah, and when you're negotiating with these folks, they aren't really looking at fair market value. They're just looking at what the sponsor will approve. And I mean, even if you get to $9,000, $10,000, $15,000, oftentimes within a 25-year radius, that's still not going to pay the bills.
Right.
So you got to be real careful I had a thought as I was going through this podcast. I wanted to run it by you, and I wish we had a financial negotiator person here. But if I were a sponsor, it would make sense that I have no idea how many documents are being stored at the beginning at the negotiation. I don't know. What if you only roll like a half a patient? What if you only screen failed everyone? You may have like a little half-inch binder of documentation that you're going to have to hold on to. Why would I pay thousands of dollars for that little bitty binder? Versus, how do I know if you're not going to knock it out of the park and be my top enroller and have a ton of documents to do? So in this industry where we literally itemize everything, doesn't it make sense just to open up a mini negotiation at the closeout for document storage?
That would make absolute sense. And you know what? We get our numbers based on our goal, our recruitment goal. And, half of our studies are like, oh, you can have up to 10 patients. And then some of them are like, it's open to however many that we've agreed on that your site's allowed, which is 8, 10, 15, 20. And we build that amount off of that contract. But then what happens during the study when you reach that 10? Another site's only been able to get screen fail patients, can't enroll any, and they've asked you to take on more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they
but you don't pay more for doc storage.
Exactly. They amend the budget for how many more patients to take on, but they never go and up any of the other fees or will even allow us to negotiate that. So if we bring it up, it's like, no, all we're doing is this.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
or maybe you could do doc storage, like charge per patient or per screen pay, or charge in some way that you can actually scale it to the amount of effort you have.
And then collect on those at closeout?
Yeah. I mean, or even, you could even collect on a monthly if you wanted to. You just assess however many patients have been processed based off of the amount of documents that you're managing.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think, Nicole?
That's such a good point. That should be like any sponsor, I feel like, is kind of going to laugh at this, what I'm about to say, that there should be, a closeout budget review, for every single study. There should be. Things change, things happen. Like you said, it could be from one extreme to another. A site enroll and they're contracted but for the same amount, and they could be doing completely different capacities, loads of paper or even, even electronic, you still have to store it. And I would say if you are talking about electronic, you should look into whatever the cost of your system is and the breakdown of that, right? Yeah. Because usually that's broken down. And you can kind of help that internally, your site figure out how much you would change that cost to, or make it monthly.
CTMS and eReg programming startup, study-specific programming of your CTMS systems for that trial is a very invoiceable item. There's no doubt about it, and you can do it. But I don't want to sound cynical, but I always have that. In a world where everything is itemized down to the T, we want to know screen fail visits, everything that happened in the screen fail. We're only going to pay for that. We're only going to pay for unscheduled visits, only everything that you've done. Everything is we're only going to pay for every 15-minute increment that your coordinator enters data. Boom, boom. Everything is itemized. Yeah. But then all of a sudden, these black holes like doc storage are not. And I find that itemization tends to be forgotten when sponsors see the actual cost of something. So they'll make something vague when they know that it's not going to fully fund the event. So it's almost like a hypocritical itemization. We'll only itemize when it benefits us. But if it doesn't benefit us, we want it, bulk. We'll just buy you bulk, do that. And then, we're just going to throw some money at it. No questions asked. We want to just take it. I don't know, Anna. What do you think? Have you ever seen that where itemization is kind of one-sided or hypocritical?
Yeah, you brought up a good point about unscheduled visits. They'll itemize that majority of the time. Okay, you did physical, vitals, AEs, con meds, and that's it. Compared to something like document storage, flat rate fee. Doesn't matter how many patients. Doesn't matter what's happening. This is what you get. Lucky for the chump change. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the sites are going to be eating those costs in the long run. 25 years later, maybe so how much do you think it really costs for document storage? Let's say you've met your enrollment goal. Let's just make up 10 patients on a trial. It's a standard 2-year, 96-week trial. 10 patients successful. Let's say you had a screen failure ratio of 20%. You're doing great. So maybe you have like records for 12 to 15 patients. And you have to hold on to that according to contract for 25 years. How long or how much do you think that actually costs a site?
Well, every year we do an evaluation with how many boxes we're taking to Iron Mountain and how many or what size hard drive and how many times we're going to have to replace that or the flash drives, and then considering the time as well. So we do a new estimation of that every year, and we put it down like for about 10 patients in a 3-year long study.
Mm-hmm.
And so our fees for document storage are very specific to that amount because we can back it up with proof of like, here's my itemizations and how I got to this number.
Yeah.
And I would say that we probably cut ourselves about 1,000 to 3,000 short because there's always these issues that you don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
Or even though I'm like, okay, let's say they're going to ask me to pull records electronically at least twice over that 25-year span. And I'm going to throw those fees in there too. Well, then you get that one study that actually calls in a couple of times.
Yeah.
Or you accidentally were supposed to get box 1 and 2, and all they brought you was 1, and now it's another fee.
I have another run. Yep.
Now I have another run to do. And so I do think that we don't track this, but I think we end up cutting ourselves short quite often.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Nicole? Just back of napkin estimate, actual cost of doc storage?
Yeah, I was kind of trying to run some numbers through my head. I mean, it totally varies, right, on all of the pieces. But if you took an average, I mean, you're looking at a few thousand. I mean, at least 1,500 a year, right? Like, and think about that. I'm already thinking about a budget that I feel like I need to reach out on. Because I'm like, if you really do think about the cost of that, let's even just call it 1,000, right, a year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's either way, right? We could call that paper or electronic. We could figure that out. Let average 1,000 a year, and 25 years, $25,000. I guarantee you.
I've never seen that. Never seen a $25,000 bill for doc storage. I've never seen a sponsor approve that.
No.
Right. And by the time 10 years goes by, I mean, kind of like our skit, even 10 years though, you might have one research team member that's still there, probably, the one loan coordinator or manager hanging on. And they're not thinking about 10 years ago, hey, we should check out that one study from 10 years ago and do a little analysis. I mean, it would be beneficial, but nobody thinks about that. I don't, I do now.
Time, right? Who has time to run those metrics and whatnot?
I mean, it's a project in itself. If you've ever had to clean up old school paper records, we were talking about that, like the stuff I saw there was like a peanut butter sandwich in one of our boxes one time. I was like, yeah. And this thing was from like the 80s. It was dehydrated peanut butter sandwich at that rate. But I mean, there was no quality control, no oversight over what to put in the box. You just, you threw anything.
You threw everything in there.
And as a result, that's dead weight. There's no reason to put. There's no reason to pay Iron Mountain for that space with stuff you don't need to do. So, how do you think sites can optimize if they choose paper and might still need some paper here and there? How do you think they can optimize and know what to store?
I think they have to have really really good SOPs on what it is that needs to be stored, right? Because ultimately it's whatever can tell you the story of what happened for every patient in the study and all your regulatory documents along with like your CTA. It does not mean that every single invoice item is required by the FT. Maybe it's required by your site though, when they have to go back through and make sure that they've been paid for everything. Maybe that's something there. But for us, that all has to be done before closeout, because after closeout, they're like, okay, we're all done with this study. If you find something, you're not getting those funds.
Mm-hmm.
That website that you went to pay your invoices is gone. The protocol number is gone. That special email you used to send everything to is gone for.
It's long gone.
Like you've been literally closed out. Like there's no finding those funds. So why are we keeping all the invoice slips? Why are we keeping all the patient receipts? Why are we keeping all the proof of us paying for their meals or us paying for their Ubers? That all that stuff doesn't need to be in there. And I know, Dr. Fox, you and I talked about this when we went through and had to dig out old records from the 70s. We're finding, McDonald's receipts and Burger King receipts, which were a joy to look at, that you can get an entire meal for $2.99.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But it still was pretty pointless and it took up a lot of space. But then the sites are also thinking, what do I do with this giant folder full of invoices and receipts? Because they're all on paper. Well,
Yep.
I'll just archive it to get it out of my desk. So if I needed something, I could look back to it.
Yep.
Those are the people that have a hard time going from electronic to paper, that they have to keep all that stuff. But if you have a strict SOP of what to have and what not to have, what's safe to let go and what's required of you to save, it should help. It should help empty those boxes out.
Yeah.
And just to chime in here, just one more point that I have on this is there's certain particular items from our source documents that will degrade before we hit that 25-year mark.
Oh my gosh. Have you ever had bought like a warranty at a retail store? They did the laser paper stuff.
Yes.
And you open it up in like 3 years or something, and it's just a blank piece of paper. It's just gone.
That's your EKG strips. Those are your printed EKG strips. If you put tape on those strips, it's gone within a couple of days. That ain't. So putting them inside a protective filmed sheet of paper, okay, that's fine. But what we ended up having to do, and lessons learned from digging through these records, is we have to make a photocopy of our EKG strips, certify them as original, and keep those in with the archiving stuff, because we can't have, and we do that at every single visit, right? Because if you go to store that information, it's gone anyways.
Yeah. So now you're literally paying a big, pretty penny bill with Iron Mountain to store blank paper.
To store blank paper.
Yeah.
Pointless.
Boy, we just go to the office store for that. So, I mean, Nicole, what about you? I mean, okay, pro electronic, true, but paper does have some purpose still.
Yeah.
What would you keep versus what are you like, okay, this is a waste of space and we don't have to keep this?
Yeah. To piggyback off of Anna, I mean, exactly what she said. You have to think about what you're required to keep, right? You start with that. And then I would say, really just use common sense about the data, right? Like think about this study, think about what you were doing on the study, the purpose of the study, right? And think about, okay, so I don't need those travel receipts. I don't need, those food expenses. Think about what matters for the study, the data points, the reason why we're keeping the documents, right? So if you kind of have that in the back of your mind the whole time, that helps, decipher if at first you've already checked off what you're required to keep, which is a lot to begin with.
If anyone's ever read a CTA, I call it an IWO, an invoiceable window of opportunity. And if you look at a CTA, every single CTA, I guarantee it's going to have it. I think some, like in the UK, they call it like a longboat clause or something. But it's going to be within this amount of timeline. If you don't claim money or remit money or whatever it might be, you use it or lose it. And you have so much time from the last payment. Normally it's like 30 to 60 days from the last payment to dispute. But after that, so once closeout hits, you have like 2 months, sometimes it's only 1 month, to dispute your finances. And then it's set in concrete, set in stone. No more money provided to you, no more opportunity to dispute. The CRO warns you right there. You got like 1 to 2 months to close this out financially, and then we're moving on. There's no more going back. So if you have only 1 to 2 months really to reconcile everything and make it right, there's really no point in putting any financial information in long-term doc storage. By the time you take it from that 1 to 2 year period at the site down to your long-term doc storage, the finance boat is shipped. You're done. So there's really no point of putting that in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some of those have to be lessons learned too when it comes to your contracts and your budget, especially if you're a small independent site and you're doing your own budgeting and you don't have a budget finance team. I know that I made a mistake maybe like 10 years ago, something in the beginning of my time, where we put for an archiving fee per year. And then in the CTA, it was written out with however they put the language in there to be invoiced at the end of each fiscal year.
Yeah.
But how was I supposed to do that when all budget stuff was ending, 30 days after the study made its debut of we're ending?
Isn't that something?
We lost out on a lot of money there.
Mm-hmm. And like if they access some talk-down tech, like a sponsor-based, portal-based for invoices, and that closes down after the trial closes out, how are you going to send invoices?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I mean, making an annual fee, that's great, but
it not
offering the platform to request that money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, because who knows what closed down, it's just obnoxious.
Yeah, it's like sending the invoice into the abyss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here it goes.
Thanks for sending it, but we're not going to respond to you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, just go put it in our suggestion box, which is a shredder. It's just like whatever it might be, which is interesting if they put these little, I call them brass magnets. I don't know if you ever heard hardware store jokes, but it's a brass magnet. Oh, yeah, we're going to sell you a brass magnet or a board stretcher or whatever you want to call it, but it's literally a tool that's for impossible things. It's useless. Yeah. And so when you're in the beginning of a CTA, and this might go back to the whole, maybe you need another negotiation at the end. When you're in the beginning of the CTA, the person you're negotiating with, that CRO, budget analyst person, they're not going to have any skin in the game by the time this is actually relevant. They're just following orders, checking off boxes. There's no skin in the game. They don't care.
Right.
And they don't understand what it really takes for fair market value. Let's talk about inflation. Let's talk about everything that might happen. There's so many unknowns in the beginning. So I'm
sorry, Dr. Ross, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
My favorite contract person that Alexandra and I ever worked with used to be a coordinator and then got a job at a CRO company doing budgets and contracts. So, oh my gosh, was that such a blessing. So when I explained how to do something and why I needed it, she's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, not a problem. I'll work that out for you. Mm-hmm. I just need X, Y, and Z from you. Man, was that great. But that was one time. That was one person for one CRO company. And then made me start wondering, do they perhaps not hire people with clinical research experience so that they could have a good negotiator on hand to try to strong arm the sites into letting them know that we are the most expensive site they've ever worked with and that we're asking for things that aren't going to be in the study. And to second that, on top of it, is when we're doing the contract negotiations, we're lucky if we get the full protocol. We're lucky if we get all the manuals that we need to understand exactly how many tubes we're drawing, exactly the processing steps, and all the equipment that's required for the sites to have that they're not going to give us. But the budgeting team doesn't understand that the sponsor isn't going to give this to us, and that the sites have to get it themselves. They'll say, oh, everything's going to be provided. I mean, we're in that right now. In case you can tell, we're in that situation right now. Or don't worry, the sponsor will provide you everything. It gets to the SIV, and they're like, oh yeah, you need to have all this material already. We're like, we're literally in a saline shortage right now. We're not going to be able to obtain this. We're a research site. It's going to go to the hospitals, the emergency rooms, and urgent cares way before it's going to get to us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, don't worry about it. We'll take
Yeah.
care of it in the budget and the contracts. Budget contract people, no idea what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. So it's
exhausting.
interesting when you talk with negotiators and they make these statements. As soon as you look at them and say, "Oh, that's wonderful. Could you please provide me with that documentation that you told me that?" They are super hesitant. They're like, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. I don't know if I can do that. They don't want to be held accountable for what they're telling you.
Or the best one is, I'm not allowed to send anything via email other than the contract and the budget. I'm so
try
sorry.
to throw you through the talk down tech portal, and you have to do everything in there.
Talk down tech portal.
That way you as a site, you don't have access or records to the negotiation process. It's all controlled by the sponsor portal.
Mm-hmm.
Which, wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden disappears after the negotiation is over. You have no record of that.
Yep.
Well, isn't that convenient? So this is kind of going off topic, and I want to get back on topic. But if you ever do have to do a talk down tech portal, which is simply amazing, be sure that you take screenshots and you pull things as it happens, because you will not have the opportunity to get that record otherwise. So grab it as it happens, and you will not regret it. When things start to happen, which they will, you get the contract signed, everyone's all up and running, and you're like, but you told me this. Well, no, I didn't. Well, here's the documentation that you did. Oh, crap. Then they have to be held accountable. But Nicole, I wanted to switch gears because a little cornerstone birdie told me that you do something for sites that I think is super valuable and very relevant. So for all of those sites who are holding on to iron mountains of paper, isn't there a legal and compliant process to fix that?
Yes. I'm so glad you asked.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really simple. It sounds like it's going to be way more complicated than it is. But honestly, you're scanning everything, right? You're scanning everything, creating an electronic record of all of your original source. So you're going to need some sort of system if you don't already. But this is a perfect way for sites to start. Like if they're scared of, that transition, this is a great way to start. So all of your long-term storage documents that you would normally have waiting for Iron Mountain or in Iron Mountain, scan everything. One of the biggest things, though, that sites do forget is you need to let the sponsor know that that's happening.
Yeah.
You need to let them know that that's happening. And you can try to invoice. I mean, like we were just saying, it totally depends on the timing of the sponsor, the closeout, all of those things. If it's something that's still being held on site, you might have a chance. But you also need to tell them not only the transition, but what they want to happen with the original source documents, right? You can't just decide, oh, now I've scanned them, so now we can shred everything. You really need to collaborate with the sponsor on that. One thing I have been joking about lately is, okay, we're happy to send all of these original source documents to you for you to store if you want to keep all the paper. We'll send them to you for a fee. We're going to need to pull them out of storage and send them off. Or you can call me and I'll set them all on fire for free. And I'll even send you video evidence of destruction.
Yeah, there you go. Here's a match. We're going to have bonfires at Nicole's house.
Yeah, marshmallows. Get out your marshmallows.
S'mores.
Oh, I hope.
Here's some s'mores. Oh my gosh. So just to confirm, there are sites with a ton of paper who've done a ton of studies, and there is a pathway to compliantly digitize paper documents and go through a process where sponsors know about it. It's fully compliant. Everything's good to go. And there are sites that are doing that right now.
Yeah. And think about just as the medical industry, when we switched from paper to EMR systems.
Yep.
Same thing. I can't believe that we're this far down the line that we're now talking about it for research. It should have been years ago, but yeah.
Iron Mountain's going to be sad.
Being a site person that was all paper and trying to transition into eSource, eReg, that's actually what we did. Is we started with, well, let's just scan everything. We're going to just start scanning the regulatory to archive. and get comfortable there and work that out. Like, very methodical steps here of getting comfortable. And until we wound up doing all regulatory only electronic and made sure we were following the rules and easing our way into it. It was actually quite a nice ease step from somebody who is not comfortable going from outside of the world of paper that I've known for so long.
Yeah, that's great advice. And by the time you get there, right, you're almost, you're yearning for the electronic versions. You don't want the paper anymore. You don't want to drop binders everywhere anymore.
Right. Exactly.
No more Hallmark movies for Nicole. I'm not going to do that. So, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's sites they're scared. They're like, I don't want to get rid of something and then regret it. And I guess the question is, as you go through that process, how do you prevent regrets? Like, what are the best steps to make sure it's all done properly and it's, you're never going to regret doing it?
Call me.
Call Nicole.
Call Cornerstone. That's one way, is to honestly, when you get a second eye on things, it does help. It does make you feel like, okay, I am on the right path. I am doing what I'm supposed to do. Even if you just want to, consult that you're doing the right thing. Because that's the biggest thing, fear, right? You don't want to have those regrets and something that you can't undo. You can't unshred something. You can't unfire something.
Unburn something.
You can't unfire something.
So, you can call somebody like us, to help make sure that you're on the right path. But otherwise, do your research, right? And that's where sometimes we run out of time in the day, but take some time to do some research about what you are obligated to do, right? What you actually have to keep, what, ECFR Part 11, what you need to upload and scan, and how you want to organize it. Organization. It continues. People think that, now we're just going to scan it all and dump it all into one thing. No, you still have to organize it. You still have to use a naming convention. Please still be organized. You will regret that later.
100%.
Pretty much. And I was thinking the same thing. So I think before you go through that digitization process, it might be good to go through that exercise to make sure that, one, you are squeaky clean, like everything is done. I know you've got closeout, you got things like that, but everything is organized, everything is done, and importantly, everything is relevant. So you might be holding on to things across the 2-year period, like, just in case they said, we're waiting on our withholding to get paid back. That can take 2 years, literally.
Yeah.
So you might have some finance information at the 2-year point that will no longer be relevant. So maybe you have to go through like 2 tiers of archiving. Or have you ever had to do that, Anna?
Well, yes. So in the very beginning, before we could figure out exactly what our process was going to be, we did what I would consider like a pilot trial and error here. And we had one that was paper source, paper reg. We scanned in all the reg. We figured it out, like, hey, this is where I'm going to download it. This is the flash drive. This is the hard drive. And see if we could actually do what we're trying to do with it, right? Prove that, like, okay, this is the system we're going to use, and then try it moving forward. Well, so happens that it was way easier to not just have your standard cloud electronic archiving and your standard Iron Mountain archiving. Well, for a backup plan or doing it twice, we'll just put all that together on another hard drive and keep it here on site. Because even though I'm going to move all this stuff to my Iron Mountain and whatnot, I didn't work it out in the budget most appropriately. My fire safe box is right here. I've got everything on the hard drive. It's okay, okie dokie in my CTA, and everybody knows that I did this as my secondary backup plan. And I'm so happy I did, because I did have to pull data from there, and I did have those last minute documents that I had to add to it. And I had it all right here and quickly available.
Nice.
Yeah.
There's that organization Nicole was talking about right there.
Right. But still, it sucks because we haven't been able to, for every study, drop that plan. that backup storage plan or that secondary storage plan.
So I know, and we've run into something like this, and Anna, I think we talked about it, but there's always the fear of what system you use for electronic storage. There's been some situations where you purchase this electronic storage service, and then 5-7 years later, company disappears, and how are you going to get your data? Or I know for a fact, because I talked to some friends at Amazon, like AWS, they actually have offerings and services where you just buy long-term storage at a much lower rate because you don't access it very much. And like you can just go get your own AWS server. Odds are that's going to be sticking around a lot longer than anyone, because that's probably one of the biggest ones in the field. So Nicole, Anna, just chime in both back and forth. What systems do you think might be, without endorsement, I'm not saying sell it, but what do you think would be a good system to trust with your document storage?
My own.
Your own?
Something I create myself that doesn't cost me anything but my time.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say, right? Because there's so many, and they're up and coming, right? There's so many up and coming. I think the biggest thing to focus on is asking the right questions when you're demoing these systems, right? So what kind of compliance does your system offer? Ask for it. Ask for it in paper. Ask, to see it. What kind of post-study operations will you allow? Right? So what can we download to a flash drive, to our hard drive? What can we zip up? Right? Ask all the things. I'm definitely not the most techie person, but that is how I have been able to make more solid decisions, is asking all the questions, even if I don't know if they're relevant. More information, the better. But I think the biggest one is, how are you compliant? Right? Show me how you're compliant with all research, regulations. And that should be the first one, and go from there. And then I'm sorry, coming from the person putting in a lot of the data, make sure that it's user friendly. Make sure that your site will use it, because think about it, the transition is already for a lot of sites hard and a push, right? If they have problems using the system, I mean, that's going to be a huge barrier, a huge speed bump. There's going to be a lot of reluctance. So I think, those are kind of my big takeaways on which system. It's hard to name. There's hundreds, and I've used a dozen probably. And they change and they upgrade and they get better, continuous improvement. So I really can't even speak to like who's on top right now.
But they sell out. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but their company
they literally
gets bought
sell
out. They go bankrupt. Yeah. Their servers have been bought by somebody else, or you have the opportunity to get your data back, no free of charge for you to take someplace else.
Yeah.
That's my problem. I don't want to use another system. I don't want to use another company. I'm already paying for this, that, and all these other different things. I don't want to buy something from somebody else. I'd rather just have a safe way of, the One Oak owners to maintain those electronic files the best way that we can, and just keep rolling with the changes. Like you said, floppy disks are out.
USB will be out
on the way out.
I mean, before you know it, we're all going to have brain implants, and all the data is just going to be stored in there. So we just got to watch.
Wasn't that a movie where they had like a chip in the back?
Yeah,
they just upgraded their process server.
I think it was Doctor Who did that. He did a really cool one on that.
Oh, really?
Update.
Love
update. And then you remember, I don't know if anyone saw, but there's a Doctor Who episode where they were in this thing, and it's kind of like that. And this dude had all this money, and he got the super duper information update, and his whole forehead opened up to a port. It's like, and then a little crystal going. So anyway, very memorable. I don't know if any Doctor Who fans out there, but I guess that's what we're gonna have for our microchips. So
yeah,
we're got about 15 minutes left, which is great. But big question, and this is kind of like the underlying theme from the skit all the way through. I know Anna put it in her will. How do you, as a company, pass the torch properly for document storage and archiving? How do you make sure the next generation of professionals know like what to do, how to do, like, and I know SOP is the number one thing we're going to say. I'm just going to throw that out there because I want to take the easy one, but, and we can expand into that. But what are your thoughts on passing the torch for dock storage from one generation to the next at your site?
Being available. I don't see this going in any other way than not dying and being able to be available to whatever the questions as they come. I mean, I'm sure if we were to sell our site or something, like, they're not going to want to have to call us, 10 years later to ask about X, Y, or Z. But I think that's the biggest problem solved right there, next to having it in your SOPs, or taking that new owner or that new manager under your wing for a long period of time to really show them, right, that onboarding process as long as possible, so that they can get comfortable with everything, and just pray that when they move on, or if they move on, they'll do the same.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I was going to say on the piece of the onboarding of that, the takeover and the offboarding of yourself. There needs to be a specific section to cover archiving, right? It could easily be forgotten with all the other things that you would be making sure they know. So that should be in an SOP.
Yep. If you really think about it, and I don't know, this is like a deep thought for industry, but our SOPs are essentially our industry's traditions. That's pretty much what all SOPs are. They're just traditions. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard the story about the person who was preparing Thanksgiving dinner, who cut the turkey in half and then put it in the pan. And then the daughter was like, "Why'd you do that?" And I don't know. I just put it in the pan. And so she went to her mother. And her mother's like, "Well, my mom used to do that." And then she went to her mother. And so finally we went to grandma. We're like, "Grandma, why in the world do we cut the turkey up and put it in pieces in the pan?" And grandma's like, "Well, we didn't have a pan that was big enough." So we had this weird tradition like years ago where it's like we did this for a reason, but nobody knew why, but people just keep doing it. That's kind of what an SOP is. And we can talk about that's probably another podcast. Let's talk about SOPs and updating SOPs and how to do CAPAs and things like that later. But in this instance, what would you put in your archiving SOP to pass on to the next generation? What are the important and relevant facts that you would have to include?
Definitely, I think Nicole and I can both agree, the list of documents that are required for archiving on a source level, on a regulatory level, and then not how to find, but where the password sheet is located for all of those flash drives, hard drives, CDs, God forbid any leftover floppy disks, and what the process is for checking that the electronic data is still available.
Yep, I agree. I was also going to say, just how you operationalize the storage altogether, right? Like how it gets there, right? Even because, it could be different scenarios. Paper that's being stored electronically, whatever. But showing them how the process goes for each type of storage, right? And then how to, like you said, retrieve anything from that. I can imagine that would be horrible. Can you imagine, being a new site director or a new site manager, and then 3 years, 4 years later, they want something from a study you've never heard of, never seen, don't know where it's at or where it's
Yep. Oh, we've got a comment from Alexandria. I'm so glad Alexandria's tuning in. Hi, Alexandria. Anna, would you be willing to read this comment for us?
Let's see. Okay, it's popped up on two different. Oh, I see. Okay. It seems that document storage really falls on the site company owners rather than being able to be delegated to a site manager. I would assume a traditional site manager may not have skin in the game. Oh, good point. To stay for a proper offboarding and being available for years after they leave the company. Does this seem to be right? I totally agree, right? Yep. You have to have ownership in what you do. And if you're bringing on, like she said, a site manager, and they don't have any skin in the game. They don't have any ownership here. What are they going to care? And I think, Dr. Fox, you have a story about that. You took on a site and all of their storage, and it's like, who cares what's going to happen in 25, 50 years or a lifetime of these documents?
That was the skit. Besides, in 10 years, that's not my problem.
Exactly.
You're dumping a problem onto someone in the future, which is just obnoxious. Now, I think that right there, as far as like having site managers do responsibilities, that has to do with org charts and SOPs and job descriptions. Put in the job description. The site manager is responsible for managing and maintaining document storage at all times. I think when you get to a company big enough, you can't let everything fall on the owner. You have to delegate. And this opportunity as a company to delegate your legal responsibilities for compliant archiving and record retention, it can fall on managers, but you have to hold them accountable. You have to give them some skin in the game. This is part of your job, and I expect you to do this. I think that is probably the only direction you can really pass that off.
That's a good point, but you don't own the company. You don't have any skin in the game. Your 2-week notice, well, lucky if we're getting that. If you're going to get a better offer from another research site, you don't have an obligation to truly give us any notice. You can just be out the door.
Walk out.
Right? And now we're like, well, where's this? Where's that? We have no idea. That can totally happen too. So hoping that, you're hiring people that have that ability to commit to their role.
Yeah.
And I mean, people.
And that's just, archiving doc storage, just one example, but think about those middle management leadership positions where they're not quite owners, like they're not like the CEO, but they're like a director or a manager or even a senior coordinator in some of the smaller sites. They do things that it's like the lifeline of the company, even though they're not owners. That's part of their job. And losing them, it's kind of like losing a limb. It takes some time to regrow that limb and to reprocess it.
Well, and I think too, part of that onboarding, offboarding, should be a full review of the active, CTAs, right?
Yeah,
and because it's not just the storage, but all of the other things that you have to have that mindset of, right? That financial mindset of, okay, are we invoicing for SAEs? Are we really getting all of our pass-through invoiceable items covered? Are we leaving money on the table? They should know, the CTA review should be part of that onboarding process anyways, but archiving not to be forgotten. I think that it's just an easy one it happens at the end, it's left to the end, and it gets forgotten, often. And so I think that as they're reviewing CTAs and part of that onboarding process, that's a perfect time to review, what it means for that study. Obviously, you're going to have closed studies and such like that, but at least to get that person in that mindset of, oh, it matters, document storage and archiving, it matters. So if it matters for this study, it matters for all studies, right? And just trying to get them in that mindset, I think
that's such a perfect point. And from leaving one site to start our own site, I wish I made a day in there of going over the CTAs and the archiving. It was just, when we get to this, let me know. I'm available. And, here it has been, so many years later, and no one's ever called. So now it does weigh on me a little bit of like, hopefully they understand the notes I left.
That the fact that you care means everything. Even after you're gone, you're like, I really want this to be okay.
Right, you do, especially in research. We're such a small, tight-knit group of folks here that you want to do your best job, always putting your best foot forward and whatnot. I don't want them to miss me because I'm gone. I want them to be like, wow, it was such a pleasure of having her here.
Yeah, or she really took care of us before she left. Like, even now we're referencing her notes because she's so awesome.
Right, exactly.
And we've got 5 minutes, and this is perfect because I want to end at destruction. So
Nicole, I'll bring the marshmallows.
Fire. Okay, so things end, and that's all there is to it. And most of the sites out there just throw, it's kind of like hoarders. They put stuff in a house, they don't realize what's in there. until finally 3 generations later, and people are like, why are we, what? So there has to be a strategic protocol and process for the destruction of documents. We cannot hold on to things forever. It's just not. We can't be a hoarder. I mean, 30 years later, most of it's public information. Patents are done. Clinical trials should be over. We should be good. So what do you think should be the processes for the destruction of archiving in paper and in electronic?
Well, I haven't had the pleasure of doing this yet.
Anna, I think you have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So first, a couple of different things that happen, and I'll be mindful of our time here. One, that the contact information on the CTA that says that you need to let us know when it's time to destruct and we'll give you our approval, it went nowhere. It went nowhere. We still had those records, 15 years past the end date because we did not get that permission. So we are changing our contracts to where they say at this time, we are going to destroy, or we are going to make 3 attempts to contact you to destroy. And then our actual destruction process, when it comes to paper, it's just shredded. There's, thank God moving forward, there's not very much, but it's just shredded. And then it's just an NTF that we write that just says that I verify that this study is shredded. And that's the only little thing that we have left. And that's it. And then we also send that to the contract people that are on there. Anything that's electronic, we have a destruction process, just similar to our drug destruction. It goes with there, they incinerate it, they tell us that it's been done.
Drug and IP. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And then it's the same little note file. That's all we keep. We send it back to the sponsor. We're all good. We're all done.
Yep. What about electronic?
Well, that's it. Like how we do our drug destruction, we have the same process for any physical hard drives, physical flash drives. As far as the cloud goes, that's still new. We have not had to do any kind of letting go of that data yet.
Yep. We treated it very much like a lost to follow-up patient because we were running into the same thing. It's like the sponsor that was signed this contract 30 years ago is non-existent. The person that bought them is non-existent. They went bankrupt. They're literally not a legal entity anymore. Therefore, there's not really anyone around to sue us, for one thing.
Yeah.
So we did 3 certified letters, document the whole thing, make sure that we did our due diligence, everything we could.
Yep.
And then at the end of the game, the person holding the ball is going to be the site. And they're going to be the ones. It's going to be that leader. You're going to have to make that decision. A risk assessment, cost assessment. We've done everything possible, but we can't pay for this forever. And honestly, nobody's paying us to do it. So you have to make you have to make a decision as a leader to do this destruction.
Yep.
Yeah.
Document, organize.
Yep. And that's the best you can do. All right, we have one more. Oh, Nicole, will you read this one for us? We'll finish this. They'll wrap it up.
Sure. If the documents are sent to the sponsor for their master file, they should be the ones to retain files, especially since the FDA notifies the sponsor first, and sites being generally underfunded sometimes close. The person who owns the IP should retain the IP.
Nice, Stephen. I love it already. Agreed completely, except for ownership.
Yep.
I understand the logic behind that. However, I do think that there's a certain balance of power where sites should be the ones to retain that source. I don't know if I would let sponsors control that fully. And I've seen situations where sponsors control source, then all of a sudden, what if results change? Oh, wouldn't you know it? FDA didn't approve it. Now they can because results have changed because there's no balance of power on that. So that would be my only thought where I'm conscious about completely excluding the site from representation of the source of the clinical trials that they performed. That's my only thought. But the rest of it, I agree completely. IP is IP, sponsors own it, but keep in mind the services that sites provide and the balance of power that they do. So. All right. Awesome. We are at 1 hour, not quite on the dot, but a little over. So let's go ahead and end this up. So if I were to hand you the microphones right now and I said, what would you like to tell this entire industry about archiving, doc storage, and how much fun it can be? Let's end with that. What is fun about doc storage? What would you tell them?
What's fun about it? Oh gosh. It's just like the reason why you got into research, right? You're researching rules, regulations, how things work, and that is already fun. And now, not is it just for the drug and the patient and the protocol. Now it's just another part of it, just the regulatory side of it. I like what Nicole's been pushing here is staying organized. And honestly, I think that's the best piece of information.
Yep. And innovation. You know,
back off of her is keep organized, keeping those audit trails.
What about you, Nicole?
And sorry, Anna, there was a little bit of lag there. I didn't mean to interrupt. But yes, I agree, you know, and just for me, the innovation and of transition, right? You know, and remembering document storage. I've mentioned a couple times it's easily forgotten, but it's super important. So please keep it in mind.
Perfect. Document storage is not a second thought. If you carry anything from here, just remember that. Please, we have to plan for it ahead of time and live with it for 25 plus years. So it's critical. So we are at our hour. We're going to top it off. Number one is if you haven't seen the Christmas song, big thank you to Nicole for helping me so much on that Christmas song. It's on YouTube. Check it out. It's a minute long. All the friends of CRPN coming together to sing and advocate for better research. Please, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty on YouTube right now, but there is a brand new audio-only podcast on Podbean, CRPN Central on Podbean. We're discussing site acquisitions and sales. So another really exciting topic. If you ever want to sell your site, learn more about it, there's a podcast on that. We're going to have a live event later. We are going to try really hard to bring you some of the best content for clinical research on this podcast. Bring the best people, the best content, have the best conversations. Please support CRPN. Hit that little subscribe button on YouTube. It does help, believe it or not. It doesn't cost you much, but maybe a finger blister, but it helps a lot. So please consider supporting the channel. We really appreciate all of your support. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Keep an eye on your doc storage. This is Dr. Fox. Please like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you guys later.